Hey, gorgeous people. I'm Alexandra Blair, and welcome back to my Monday morning coffee chat show where we talk about everything happening under the sun before I finish my cup of coffee. Every week we meet here and we drag astrology out of the dirty, dry, dusty old textbooks and bring it back into the bones through art and archetype and stories and personal mythologies you're already living. This week is no exception. I'm really thrilled to let you know that I have a very special guest joining me. Hugh Tran is an astrologer, a designer, and an occultist and armchair linguist. He is a really talented and multifaceted and eclectic individual, aka someone who is perfect for this show. Hugh joined me in the afternoon last week for a cup of coffee and to talk over the transits that are happening this week. We have everything going on. The sun is entering Gemini, moving from a sextile with Saturn to a sextile with Neptune. We've got Venus trining Mars. We've got the sun in Gemini trining Pluto in Aquarius. Mercury conjoining Uranus, Saturn in Aries. What about that? Mercury also entering Gemini, adding some dignity to the sun. And meanwhile, the moon is moving from early Aquarius through mid Taurus. It is a bonkers week full of stuff, not least of which is Saturn's ingress into Aries. Now, Hugh and I talked about all of that and more, and I'm excited to get into it. But first, I want to look over some of my favorite comments from the week that you guys left on my Instagram and on my YouTube. I gotta say, I'm still really sitting in this place of love and care that you guys have left for me in my video from 2 weeks ago when I was really feeling sick at the beginning of May. The comments on that video are so kind and so nice, and I'm still looking through that incredibly evolving list of other astrologers that you guys appreciate and admire and whose work that you follow. And I'm sourcing a lot of inspiration. Okay, so many of you commented on my Scorpio full moon video last week, which had a theme of planting a poison flower. And I heard from so many people who are actually busy planting real poison flowers in their gardens this week. I thought that was so spot on and incredible. One such comment is Sarah Jorgensen 2508, who says, planting a poison flower. I just planted some in my physical garden, so this is absolute perfection in analogy form. Warding commenced. You are the best. Thank you for doing this work. Well, thank you for being here with me, and I hope your garden is happy, and well tended and loved. The happy man's mom says, quote, being present online is disgusting, end quote. Something I must have said in my video. I totally agree. Back before 2020, it was much better. Being online is disgusting. I don't like it. And yet I have things to say. And why am I going to let other people's disgusting behavior hold me back from being the version of myself that I want to be? I'm not. But this is a great fishtail into my favorite comment on my video from 2 weeks ago when I was still feeling sick. Truck X Elf says, my favorite astrologer is Rick. Compared to him, this is soggy milk toast astrology. You know, I've been looking for a name for the show. I think this is now the soggy milk toast astrology show. To you, dear stranger, I have to say, if you don't like what's on the menu, which is soggy milk toast astrology, then please feel free to dine elsewhere. And for any others who would bring an unkind or cruel or mean or nitpicky voice to my comments, just don't. I'm just going to delete it or block it. Obviously, this comment wasn't mean, it was a joke, and that's why it's a good example. But like, you're not going to come into my comments and be mean to me or to other people, because the world is big and mean and stupid enough. And all I can control are the comments on my videos and the spaces I create. And I don't care if my analytics would benefit from me allowing people to be mean to me or others. It's just not going to happen. So anyway, on with the Milk Toast Astrology Show, on to my interview with Hugh Tran. I'll see you guys on the other end. Hey, Hugh, welcome to the show. It's really nice to meet you. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thank you so much for having me on.
I'm really excited to talk to you today because I'm such an admirer of your work. I have your excellent book that you co-created with
Oh,
Palace K.
amazing.
Augustine. Beautiful, beautiful book, incredibly designed, so thoughtful and artful. And when I got this book, I was like, I need to know Hugh. I need to know who this is. So I'm really excited to be able to talk with you and connect with you today. I wonder if you could just tell my audience and anyone who doesn't know about your awesome work, like, what is your astrological background? How'd you get into astrology and what kind of astrology do you do?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Alexandra. So, My name is Hugh. I go by Hugh Tran Astro on all of the platforms, and I got into astrology through I would say I feel like I fluff my story because there's like so many different layers because I feel like some people have like a set point where they discovered astrology. And I think for me, my introduction to anything astrological was actually just through exposure to tarot. So I think like tarot, as
Cool.
for a lot of like esoteric people, you that is kind of like your gateway drug to the world of anything occult or woo or spiritual at all. And so that was definitely my pathway into astrology. That before it's actually kind of funny to think about because I knew about decans before like I even knew about like the intricacies of like planets and aspects and stuff like that. So I definitely think that the tarot really equipped me with familiarity with the astrological language, especially like
Mm,
with so many people who practice tarot using decks like the Rider-Waite. It's informed by the Golden Dawn, and they of course implement a lot of astrology into their method of working with tarot. So yeah, I think that's like my long answer. But it was actually in junior high when we had or like high school rather, where I had this really cool English teacher, and I grew up in Utah, but she was really subversive and actually kind of made our sophomore class. She took out like a copy of like the only astrology book you'll ever need, and it basically made the entire
classic.
class run their sun, moon, and rising. And
Wow.
before I kind of had an understanding of like my, sun's your sun sign. But then when I discovered it, I was like, oh wait, there's this ascendant, and it's like so detailed, and there's like your moon sign. I feel like actually for a lot of people who get into astrology, I don't know if you feel this way, but when you discover that you have like your moon sign, that was totally revolutionary for me. I was like,
Life
oh,
altering for sure.
this life altering. Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
I think we
yeah.
were talking a little bit before about like if you have your sun kind of alone in a sign and you have maybe a stellium
Hmm.
somewhere else, or you have prominent planets in your rising, or
Hmm.
your moon is really strong, or your Saturn is really strong, you can live your whole life
Hmm.
reading sun sign astrology and just thinking, this is bullshit. This doesn't apply to me. What is
Yeah.
this?
Yeah.
Trash. And
Yeah.
then ironically, we were talking about how we both have our ascendant ruler in Aquarius, and I also came into astrology through a school assignment, and it was almost like the institutional requirement was the only thing that kind of could have brought me in. Like I never would have given it a fair chance except for a grade from a
Totally.
teacher.
Totally. Yeah, 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 totally. And she was a really, like the hip punk, subversive like English teacher, that really changed your life. Like that she was that for me. So I was like, okay,
Definitely.
my mind's been opened up to this world and taking it more, because I used to scoff at it because, as you're going through your own spiritual journey, a lot of us are working either through a lot of religious trauma stuff or
Yeah.
like working through a lot of inherent materialism. So the fact that, just from the pages of books, something could say this much about you and even say things or speak to things that you haven't shared with any other
Yeah.
person, that to me was what made me like really get involved into trying to understand astrology more deeply.
That's so beautiful. And I think it ties into your sort of like intersectional approach to astrology because it, some of the things that you
Totally.
see when you're cross-referencing like tarot, decans, planets, the
Hmm.
aspects, it really just pulls in quite a breadth and diversity of lived experiences into these symbols and these signs. If you know how to travel
Totally.
them deeply, you can go very far in many different directions. And I know that that's something that you do. You incorporate design and you incorporate linguistics and occult into your astrology
Totally.
approach. It's so cool to see.
Yeah, and I think like when and I even today a lot of my early practice in tarot, I think it was just building my ascendant ruler's in the third house, and I have my moon in the third house. So to me, I think about this relationship between praxis, and we spoke earlier before this recording about this relationship between praxis and theory. And for me, I think some of my early tarot training and deeply built relationship with tarot just gave me a lot of like the really fertile substrate for me to take into astrology because essentially what you're building I believe, like with any skill, which I associate with the third house, It's this thing that you keep returning to, right? That you it's being able to build up this muscle of symbolism and meaning making, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the tarot practitioners, especially in like the modern, early modern, are exposed to like like Jungian work, like the work of like psychoanalysts and this idea of working with archetypes, which is older for sure, but even this idea that some kind of symbol can encompass things, ideas are way bigger than you was really intriguing to me. And when I approached astrology and I started to learn astrology more deeply, I'm like, oh, I actually already know how to think this way. Like this storytelling, this allegorical way of working and seeing patterns with them. It's just pattern recognition. For me, I like it's like
Totally.
the aqua tendency. I don't know if you can relate to this, but this idea of being able to see building blocks and see how it builds up these larger frameworks and build it, and then therefore a greater cosmology. That to me was always really, really fascinating.
Yeah, I was just listening to an Adam Ellenboss lecture today, and he was talking about the etymology of the word pater in relation to solar stuff,
Mm,
which is ninth house stuff, like we're
hmm
talking about. And he was saying, like, pater is the root word for pattern, and pattern is what forms an archetype, like something occurring
hmm
over time and repetition.
hmm
But the sort of like inverse of that and the third house complement, lunar complement of that is like the matter and the material and the actuality, how
Absolutely.
things actually, like a pattern can exist in theory, but a perfect triangle in his example, doesn't necessarily exist in matter.
Yeah.
And so there's this other
Yeah.
complementary piece to it.
Absolutely. And in our conversation before this, we were talking about how a lot of astrology, we associate astrology and astrologers to be rooted in like the ninth house being one of the places you can find people who are interested in astrology, and it makes sense because being like the joy of the sun, it's like this place where it's just tipping away from the axis of the 10th house where you have like this vantage point after culmination, and therefore it's like a place of long distance travel, but also the place of God, the house of theos, of
Hmm.
divinity itself, and being able to have greater perspective, and therefore theories, you can form a great overarching theory. But then at what point do you need to also bring it down onto the opposite side, right? And that to me, being a third house person, I've always really seen like a need in its and a beauty in like this place that's kind of subdued. It's like underneath the horizon, right? But it's like this place of goddess, because you need both.
Right.
In any kind of esoteric or divinatory framework, it is always this constant negotiation between balancing your theory with the actual praxis. Because sometimes if we are too imbalanced in the sense that we're only stressing things that are to the letter, it's like, well, that can't be true because that's not what history was like written in a history book somewhere or like in an old astrological text. And I'm always trying to negotiate between how much I draw from the tradition and how much I just simply allow myself to feel and live a more embodied astrology, especially since our world is so it trends towards the rejection of matter, which a lot of like the astrological tradition, because of these schools of thought, like Platonism, like that later um, some of that thinking got transmitted into Christianity, where we're not focusing on like the feminine, the yin, the matter, the material substance of lived life, And I'm always trying to find that balance within myself, and that reflects in everything I do, my art and my astrology.
Yeah, beautiful and great point about incorporating spirituality. Now, I'm like a pagan and a animist, and I feel like these words
Same
suck.
here.
They suck, but you have to say them.
Yeah.
It's like we've been torn apart from one another in so many different ways that like if what it takes is for me to use a word to bring us together, like I will.
hmm
But I think it's
hmm
interesting when I talk with friends who use astrology who don't have a spiritual component because I can't imagine I can't imagine that. I can't unentangle those things for me. It feels so significant that throughout the history of astrology, it always was married to some spiritual component and practice, even something as sort of
Absolutely. Absolutely.
atheist in a way as stoicism, but just there's always been some other practice of reflection or integration or, you know, digestion even that complements astrology.
Totally. And I think that that type of thinking, which Palace spoke to a lot in their manifesto in the IC, and like just thinking about what astrological practice, this next generation of astrological practice looks like, and that starts from us. I think like a lot of times we have to really understand the roots of the way we talk and frame everything that we do and how that affects subtly the way that we think about our astrology. Because, there's nothing inherently about astrology that makes us care for other people and care about the world and
Mm,
our relationship to the world around us, right? So if we practice and live in a structural pattern that is potentially um, extractive, then with the way that we frame astrology and how we interact with astrology, we might have some of those extractive tendencies where it's like, oh, what can I get from it? How can I have a purely utilitarian approach where what can it do for me? How can it serve me? You know? And
brilliant.
I really think about how like those things bleed into the way that we frame these things. Because there is a genre of like, I see this all the time where it's like like using astrology to predict crypto whatever, and I
Yeah.
think I have some questions about the way that we engage with with some of that stuff because it's like, okay, like who's it serving, right? Because it's a powerful tool. It's a tool to not only derive meaning but really see how patterns, of nature, because astrology is indicative of the forces within nature. Um, so it is inherently like amoral in the sense that it's not neither good nor evil.
Right.
So that it's up to us to decide how we engage with it. And the end result is, I think, entirely dependent on our approach and our thinking around our astrology.
Yeah,
So,
obviously that's why I react so strongly to your astrology and to your approach. I feel that in everything I do. I mean, everything I do and say and put out into the world makes it through 55 layers of overthinking and consideration about the kind of values I'm promoting and the kind of,
mhm,
approach I'm taking and what it's saying to others and how I'm signaling to other people with my work, what I stand
mhm,
for and what I think the world should be like.
totally.
So, chart ruler in Aquarius unite on that one, on that front.
Totally, totally. It's like, and it's
But
so hard, right? I think about it all the time with
brutally
like
hard.
and every aquas feel all the time because there's all this pressure because you're ever cognizant of the systems, right? Like I think every aqua knows and
Yeah.
has that in like the forefront of their mind all the time. So being able to not, because there is like a balance between like being able to actually just allow yourself to do the thing, even if it's imperfect, because you know, for instance, like everything that's happening politically right now, the fact that we live under capitalism, there's just so many forces where you can never to strive for perfection can sometimes be self-defeating, and I've had to learn that the hard way, where like I held back from doing or saying anything because I just felt like I couldn't perfectly, but like, the reality is nobody can like exist perfectly if like all these things are way bigger than us, and to put that as our sole responsibility is also can be counterproductive. And so it's like it's what matters more is like trying our best to live by principles, whether they're connected to a larger uh, organization. Like, yeah, and this conversation has come up a lot, especially in like the astro community. Like, because we're not, especially to the wider world, which is inherently more like secular materialist in a lot of ways. Um, a lot Astrology is just not monolithic. So it's up to the even individual practitioners to really, really communicate to the world what guiding principles are they kind of using as the foundation of their practice, and it's like the informed consent, of like
Mm,
when if somebody is reaching out to you for a reading. I think I put it and make it really apparent on my At least I try to on my website and like my own work, that I always that all my work is just informed by like an ethos, and I think that's really important to me, that like every astrologer should be thinking about what uh, I guess guidelines, self-imposed or otherwise, that they're living by.
Yeah, that's brilliant.
Which
It is
having
very clear on your
spirituality
website.
helps with that a lot.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Having
It's very clear on your website, like, and I really admire that about, I mean, it helps that you are an expert designer because it's beautiful to look at and engage with. Like when I try to put that
Thank you
crunchy
so
shit on my
much.
website, it's just crunchy. So I admire you a
Yeah.
lot. But yeah, I think about that a lot when people, I think astrology kind of at its worst can be a tool to just really serve. There's like two vectors of it. And one is like just serving systems that don't serve us with some of the ways
Hmm.
that pop astrology functions. Like I just personally don't care for. That's not my personal
Hmm.
moral ethical code. And then I think there's
Yeah.
another way in which astrology can just serve an ego-centered way of seeing the world. And I just cringe a little when I hear it. Of course, we all do it. We live and breathe astrology. We say things like, oh, my Cancer moon this or my Gemini sun that. And it's funny,
Hmm.
but in a non-tongue-in-cheek way, it's so damaging to hear sometimes doing small group astrology or interacting with even people, strangers where I live, and they just use this as another language to serve and talk about their own sort of unhealthy preoccupation with their self. That sounds so critical, but it
Yeah.
really, I see it as like
No,
almost
totally.
endemic. It is really bad when it's
Yeah,
bad.
totally, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that there is like a balance between like, yeah, because we're people who exist in the world in space time. Yeah, like your chart is indicative, and that's why it's compelling. Your chart really does say, really discernible things about you. You can do that, but also it shows your inherent interconnection, as we know from the astrological tradition. When you dig further into the roots of the tradition, it's like, oh, but also, what else your chart speaks to how you're connected to the other.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there is always that balance between like, you are connected to other people, and therefore your actions, and this is inherently why, a Saturn types, right, like the Saturn really being one of the planets that rule over karma. And I think the Western, especially more recent, more crunchy, modernist words usage of that word, it's like very loaded, but really what that means is just action. And so Saturn types know that because we inherently live in a world where we are interconnected, our actions impact others, and therefore, if we are a practitioner, we are a speaker, and our speech, our utterances go out into the world and interact with the minds and thoughts of other people. Are also held responsible for how we talk about our astrology, especially if that impacts people emotionally, psychologically, and even more so if you hold a role or a perceived role of authority in a field. And I try to be so mindful about like doing, and I think that's why it's like so hard to do like horoscopes, right? Because
Oh my
sometimes you feel like,
gosh,
oh,
the
I did.
horoscopes. It's so
Everyone
hard.
knows. Every astrologer knows
Every
this. Where it's like, yes,
astrologer
it's
knows.
like every astrology elder tells you that, yeah, you should, definitely give yourself a practice of like just practice writing horoscopes for a while, and it'll be the one of the most educational things you can do in your astrology practice, because it is so tough. It is so tough to be able to be succinct and measured and nuanced, and knowing that you can't possibly speak to every individual experience. Yeah, that's a tough one. Like, do not sleep
I've
on people who
convinced
write. I don't
myself,
even know how people do it.
no, I've convinced myself that it's unethical to write a horoscope, and that's how I get out of it. I'm just like, it's not ethical because I can't make one size fits all content, so I'm not doing it.
Oh yeah, I think that's why, like, when I did the ones I did recently, I'm just like, oh, I don't know. I'm gonna have to change my strategy. That's why I didn't do anything for the previous months, because it is just very hard, you know. And maybe this goes to show that, you like how you can't replace artists with AI and stuff like that. You also can't replace astrologers who are human, who can speak to you and see you as a human. face to face and to transmit things that no, cookie cutter machine or function possibly can, you know? And I think that's why we should be focusing on practitioners, to be able to hold and translate information. Yeah, I think that you're missing a lot when you're not catering and fine tuning to the individual.
Brilliant. I totally agree. And I'm going to have to turn us to transits now because I feel like I could probably
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
to you for
totally.
about 6 more hours about this. So like
Right, right.
maybe we'll have like a state of the Astro Union at some point. We'll have to like put a panel of like cool people together and get everybody to do some ethics brainstorming. But let's get into our
Yeah.
transits for the week if you're ready, you think?
Yes, yes, I'm
Okay,
totally
cool.
ready.
This week we have a packed week of transits. We have the sun entering Gemini on Tuesday. It's moving from a sextile to Saturn, like in late Pisces. And then when Saturn moves into Aries, the sun will be sextiling Saturn and Neptune in Aries. So it's kind of just
Mhm,
moving those modalities. And then we have Venus in Aries trining Mars in Leo on the 22nd. On the 24th, kind of a big day, the sun will trine Pluto, Mercury will conjoin Uranus, and then Saturn enters Aries, which of course we're going to talk at
mhm,
length about. I'm excited about that transit personally. And then
mhm,
at the end of the week, we have Mercury entering Gemini, which is pretty cool. We're setting ourselves up for a really cute, I think, new moon in Gemini next week. I'm a little biased, but like new moon in Gemini with Mercury there feels like a nice, like, wink breaking the fourth wall after this week of sort of like
mhm.
intensity. So, yeah, we have a lot to get into. Is there anything that you're feeling really excited about or that you want to kick us off by talking about? Or I can drive us through some of these transits chronologically.
Yeah, I'm super excited for Mercury to gain some dignity. So that's super exciting. And the fact that it happens with that new that new moon as well, just like that
Hmm.
pile up in Gemini should be really interesting. And very feels like a lot, especially I think I'm a little Jupiter and Gemini fatigued
I'm
as a
exhausted.
Jupiter
I'm
ruled person.
exhausted.
Oh, it's like I feel like there's like five. It's always like every single week there's like five different pathways or what ifs, and but you're never able to really consolidate into like, okay, let's do this thing, And as a
Hugh, it's
Sag, like I
exhausting.
really want. Oh, it's so hard. There's too many options and not a really decisive way to decide which path to go down. It's like here's an option, here's an option. Yeah, so
Absolutely. Feel like I haven't slept in a year. My brain's just been too busy for me to sleep.
totally, totally, totally.
So yeah, I think Mercury coming in on May 25th really adds dignity to the Jupiter situation. And it's nice that that new moon happens kind of outside of Jupiter's range of conjunction or combustion because it means that
Mhm.
we're not getting that chaos sucked up into the new moon. It's sort of its own separate thing.
Yeah, totally. And now, like with Mercury being, when Mercury enters Gemini, it'll be home. It'll be nice that like the fact that we'll have like that Gemini season with like the strong Mercury. I think that will also alleviate some of the hopefully the Jupiter symptoms we've been feeling, giving it a more productive flair. I think it almost like feels to me like being able to uh find something actionable with all the content that has emerged. Because for me, a lot of like the Jupiter and Gemini transit has been like uh, just dealing with the the Jupiter kind of struggle in Gemini because there is like a lack of consolidation. We in astrology we often think about Jupiter as like the principle that allows things to gel and therefore make a coherent meaning. And because Mercury's inherent natural significations are more drying, it tends to separate, and reduplicate. And I think with Mercury and Gemini, it potentially would can really show some pathways for us to tangibly or skillfully use the information or ideas that come up.
Love the word skillfully. And the the beauty of the mutableness of Gemini is like holding two disparate things at once. So instead of the drying up, it's almost like
Absolutely.
I can hold the dry and the moist. Like I can actually hold
Mm,
both things
hmm.
as true at the same time and see both things. I feel
Absolutely.
excited just generally about the sun coming into Gemini after spending so long in Taurus. Now, personally,
Hmm.
I hate Taurus season because I
Right.
hate resting. I want to do stuff. I don't like this call to sit
Totally.
still. I'm in a Venus perfected year this year. The call was made. I was sick. I had to sit still. It
Mhm.
was horrible.
Yeah.
And I feel like the sun coming into Gemini at the beginning of this week, and then we have that sun trining Pluto. It's sextiling the stuff going on in Aries, and then Mercury conjunct Uranus in Taurus. That's a very different feeling. It doesn't feel like, oh, there's still restful energy. It's almost like we're moving into a place of like ideas and almost like a plot twist. Like you're feeling, ooh, there's going to be some twist in this movie. There's going to be some plot twist happening. And like that Mercury Uranus conjunction to me feels a little bit like starting to formulate an idea of how things may be different than they seem or could be different than they seem.
Yeah, totally. So it makes me really think about, since it is like a new moon, it makes me wonder whether whatever house Gemini lands in for all of our viewers today, like thinking about how um because I really think about the resourcefulness of Mercury, and it and how you can skillfully learn just enough in order to do the thing, right? And like Mercury
Hmm.
is like, it's about rapidity, especially in Gemini. It's like very sleight of hand. It's like, how can you know just enough to accomplish a thing quickly, right? If like the tendency for, the sign opposite um of Gemini, like Sag, who wants to go full out, go the distance, do the big grand thing. Mercury likes, it's like, well, what if I can like do that, instead of doing it in a month, can do it in a day. I think
Hmm.
like Mercury and Gemini has such a capability to be able to like find like the shortcut and to accomplish something with more speed than otherwise would be expected. And so that gives you more
Absolutely.
opportunities to play, right? So it's like, okay, now that I've decided that I'm going to do this and do it really quickly, how much time is like saved for me? So and especially with the entrance of Saturn and Aries, and I think we can, talk about this more, is that like it almost feels like, okay, like how can I crunch the time and do the thing quicker? Because you actually don't
Mm.
have, like all the time to do whatever you need to do. But how can you do it, but also not cut on the skill or the efficacy of something?
Ooh,
So something to think
beautiful.
about.
Yeah, I think that totally tracks for Mercury hitting that conjunction with Uranus and Taurus, even though the sun will be in Gemini at that point, kind of shining a flashlight around Gemini, going, okay, what's going on in here? And Mercury's like, oh,
Hmm.
wait, I know. It's like this bright idea and then comes in to
Yeah.
Gemini. It also makes me think a lot about how I I get a lot of content served to me that's critical of the waning attention span of the new method of doing things, which is so undesirable by these people making this content. It's
Hmm.
just like, oh, nobody can focus on anything anymore. People get obsessed with things, they drop it. And to me it's like, but what if that's a superpower? Now I'm revealing some things about myself, as a
Yeah.
Gemini with Mercury native. It's like, but what if that works a lot better for some of us? Or like, people who are
Yeah.
neurodivergent, like, are we all just speaking, oh, the attention span's waning, like, oh, things are changing? Maybe it's changing for the better for some people. Genuinely, maybe some people are going to be much better suited in
Totally.
this intellectual environment to succeed in a way that they never were in an intellectual environment that prioritized depth learning about things that maybe you didn't even care about or weren't even curious about.
Yeah, and I think like we need to like not understate, I think, how powerful or like how truly to, because in the first few degrees of Gemini, you have like Mercury actually in the balance of Mercury itself. So not only is it in domicile, it also has term dignity. And
Mm.
I really think about that as like, especially in the age of air, these I've been really contemplating what this means now that we're firmly in like this grand conjunction cycle of like having the great conjunctions in air signs. And now the conversation of our everything being so digital, um, like how much minds and the ways that we have to operate these days are just so fast than like say like our grandparents, right? Like the mind, and hence why you're seeing so many people online, mostly also because of advancement in being able to talk about these things. Like you mentioned, neurodivergence. As like a neurodivergent person, I recognizing that sometimes how neurodivergence and the different ways of thinking, or the more rapid ways of thinking can be beneficial rather than something seen as just a hindrance, right? And I
Yeah.
think that being able to switch topics, being able to hold multiplicity in your mind, being able to have all the tabs open, but then all the tabs, all the tabs are useful. You're getting useful data, you know. I think that that can be, that can be a true superpower, hinting at also the overcoming trine from Pluto, like you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is a lot of what we've just said is really foreshadowing for Uranus coming into
Hmm.
Gemini, particularly as you mentioned, with a trine to Pluto as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty fascinated by that because it means for the next 8 years while Uranus is in Gemini. I mean, I'm fascinated by that for many reasons. But one thing that I think is an interesting dynamic is that every Libra season for that time period is a grand air trine. And so it really does
Yeah,
feel like,
totally.
in addition to the grand conjunction air sign era, it's there's this powerful yearly thing moving. This is kind of talking about the distinction between the ninth and the third house. So we have this big iconic,
Hmm.
the grand conjunction, like now we're in air era. But there's also these seasonal things that are going to happen kind of every Libra season. Or if you have anything in
Hmm.
Libra or anything in your air signs, you're going to be benefiting
Hmm.
from that already for the next 8-ish years
Hmm.
while Uranus goes through Gemini. Let's talk a little bit about Saturn in Aries. So yeah, what are you thinking about Saturn in Aries? How are you feeling on death's door?
Well, as somebody who's about to start
Right.
his Saturn return, it is definitely something that has not escaped my attention, let's say.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think obviously with this transit is something, it's a huge one, any with any ingress of an outer planet. And particularly coming from like the traditional view of essential dignity, Saturn is considered fallen in Aries. So as somebody who has, like although my Aquarius planets are ruled, it is disposited back to like the Saturn Aries. I have a lot to say about, Saturn Aries in the sense that like, as everyone knows, with politics and gestures, things happening in the world right now, the collapse of institutions, I really think about our relationship to uh, yeah, stability during this time, our relationship to what we feel is secure and stable. Because Saturn, as we know, like it signifies things like structures, boundaries, things that solidify in time, things that last a really long time.
Hmm.
So inherently in the sign of Aries, the natural signification of Aries stands in direct um, conflict with some of the themes and that hence why astrologers can say that Saturn kind of struggles in Aries to what it naturally wants to do. And with the Saturn and Aries types, so like the micro generation in for like Gen Z and other people who have Saturn and Aries, I think there is like a real subversion for authority. I think it questions. There's a real inherent questioning of status quo and um, being able to uh, not being able to be mangled by rules that don't really serve you anymore, especially if on the opposite side, if Saturn is exalted in Libra. Libra is a sign of like social agreements and contracts, and that's how societies are inherently built. All of our laws, and then therefore all of our institutions and corporations, they're just a series of contracts, relational contracts that have formed into a collective structure. So, what happens when things, people start being, breaking the
Opting
laws,
out of
you
those
know,
social
opting
contracts.
out of systems, and I really, in recently in my own life, I've been thinking about like how uh, to divest, And this conversation has come up a lot in like leftist media and stuff like that, like how so much of our lives, especially in America, like America, the Sibley chart actually has an exalted Saturn. So you think about the structure of America, for instance, and you think about how corporate it is. But like basically so much of our lives, it's like kind of imbued within it, this relationship with brands and how we're kind of like marketed brands and products all the time, you know, and to the extent where we no longer a lot of things that were just were done by hand from scratch back in the day, it's now been kind of automated and kind of deferred to by these corporations who deliver us all of our things in a pretty bow. And so
Hmm.
once some of these structures start to fail, and things start to collapse, there's less regulation on things that we come to expect, like for instance, like um, a food, things like that. Um, I feel like a lot of the signature of this transit could potentially be like a very I think about Aries as like DIY. If you can't renew, you can no longer rely on other people to do it for you. I think a lot of people are going to, or you want to protest, you want to boycott, you want to divest from some systems that you feel are oppressive or not to support companies. These companies that are selling you things, the one of the solutions is to like start doing it yourself, you know and I think
Yeah.
like that this DIY kind of approach is something I really associate with my own relationship with Saturn and Aries. For as somebody who grew up as an immigrant, my family, we fled from war. A lot of the things in my early adolescence, having to like navigate being in the US, not knowing the language and having to learn really quickly. I also think about like the timeline with Saturn. And if a dignified Saturn gives you a methodical, okay, here is like a set schedule, and you do a little bit at a time, and you build up, and after 5 years, you get the degree or you get the certification, and the system just works, right? In Aries, it's like no, you don't get that luxury. It's like either you become an expert overnight or you fail. And
Mm.
I've come across a lot of things in my life where that has been true. And in speaking to some of the people who were in my age group, there a lot of times it was just very apparent that like, especially if you come from a minority area, if you come from, if you are in intersection of different sexual or ethnic minority, you realize that a lot of systems actually don't serve you, or and
Mm.
so you just had to learn through direct experience that you have to do things yourself. You would like for things to serve you a little bit more. You would like for those systems to that are set up to help and aid you in times of need, but sometimes you just biting and gnawing, you have to like learn how to do it yourself. You have to like make it or teach yourself when potentially those who are apparently older and wiser than you fail to teach you the things to better prepare you for the future. And I've come across so many instances of that where I felt like those who are older than me did not adequately prepare me for the world I was about to enter. And I felt like, and so therefore I had to just like learn it by just hitting my head, a lot of times, and just learning harsher lessons. And I think that's kind of the negative side of like some of the significations of Saturn in Aries. It is kind of like a cruel teacher at times, because you really, you get some scrapes and burns by having to learn the harsh lessons of life.
Yeah, that's so brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing all of that and for talking a little bit about your experiences. That quest for like self authority is something that I'm really thinking about for Saturn and Aries too.
Hmm.
And you've put it so eloquently in talking about your experiences, looking around for someone to help you or to care for you. Or I think
Totally.
even in a like sort of more daily context, like looking for validation from other people that really should be generated from internal places. And the amount of time you spend looking for that
Mm-hmm.
validation from other institutions or individuals or authority figures really is going to depend. That's where your personal relationship to Saturn comes in, because somebody who, or maybe your relationship to spirituality, I think as well, your own
Hmm.
spiritual
Hmm.
practice is like, if you are having a hard time in a Saturn transit, like the harder time you're having, the the more you must be resisting is what I'm hearing, is what I hear when I
Hmm.
hear somebody being
Yeah.
like, I keep getting no, I keep getting no, I keep getting no. I'm like, there's something we're missing. There's some lesson coming in here from Saturn, or there's like some requirement that you're like not seeing. There's something hidden here.
Hmm.
Um, and I think about this a lot. My partner has Sun Saturn in Aries and comes from quite a volatile childhood upbringing situation. And
Hmm.
I totally can see those themes through that life story that you're talking about as well, of
Hmm.
like really looking like, is anyone going to help me with this? Oh, okay, great. I'm going to have to do it by myself.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah, totally. It's if like Saturn in Libra fires you by saying okay and by being super polite and you're getting a very thoughtful email and you're getting severance. Saturn in Aries is kind of like okay, cut and you're out and not a word to be said. And I feel like and based on some of the stories I've been hearing online and on Reddit, it seems like especially now with a certain government uh, regime rising and worldwide, I think there's going to be a lot of like this real collective sense. And speaking to the Saturn, that Saturn conjunction with Neptune, as soon as it ingresses into Aries,
Yeah, that's
this
bold.
real feeling of a structural instability worldwide. I think that is I think we're collectively going to be if we you haven't already even more so confronting the real feelings of structural instability and how we navigate that on a personal level and on a collective level. I think that because naturally with Neptune's natural significations, it is a planet that wants to dissolve. So when
Right.
it gels with a Saturn that is already weak, it feels like making the foundations of a building basically weathering it away with water that is already kind of shaky. So the building is going to come collapsing and we gonna have to really prepare ourselves on how to navigate the imminent collapse of certain things that we felt were so strong and so reliable, right? And how and on we need like frontline workers as well because in any society, the society is only the society if you have the workers in society to uphold the structure because we're all a part of the structure. So when we blame society, we also recognizing that we are all so interlinked and we are the component parts. We are the cells of the great body that is the society or
Mm,
the world. I think of the world card. Saturn is the world. It just is. And so we are in when it is in Aries, I think Aries is very much a sign about it's that cardinal Marshall function, the diurnal Marshall function of Mars. It's like, what are you doing right now? And how does it contribute to and I think a greater awareness of that both on the negative side and the good side. It's like on the positive, more constructive side, it's like, oh, well, if these things are happening on the world, what can I do? Even if it's not this grand picture or plan, what can I do immediately to make an impact? Right. I think about Aries as like the first responder. Like a lot of like, Aries
hmm
types are like, yeah, it's like that first responder energy. It's like you don't have the time. The house is burning right now. So can you
Yeah.
actually, so
Yeah.
can you actually do something and get off your ass and just go and do it, right? It's very like Nike, just do it. Just do the thing. Don't overthink it. You actually don't have
hmm
time to overthink it, right? And I've been really having to contend with this since it's in my fifth house. It's always such a tension even as a creative. Fifth house being the house of creativity and children and stuff like that. I always negotiate between my giving myself permission to just do it and overthinking it because I naturally have that thing in me that's like, oh well, I gotta make sure it's and time it and plan it all this proper. But sometimes
Yeah.
it's just like a mechanism of procrastination. So maybe for those of us who have that tendency within us, maybe this transit can encourage us because we're actually on a true deadline. You don't really have all the time to overthink the thing. You know.
Totally. I think on a personal level, that in its more destructive way, Saturn and Aries certainly has an
Hmm.
outsider quality to it. Like you talk about the social contracts of
Hmm.
Libra, Saturn and Aries can feel very isolated, can feel very alone, very
Oh yeah.
misanthropic. But I think there is great
Mm-hmm.
potential as well, especially with the Saturn Neptune. Like some of the ways I've been thinking about this for my clients, and particularly because that conjunction is happening at 0 degrees Aries, which is the beginning of the zodiac. And so we kind of toss around this
Absolutely.
phrase like symbolic new beginning. We toss that around every month for a new moon. But talk about a huge
Yeah. Yeah.
symbolic new beginning. Like a Saturn Neptune conjunction at the beginning of the zodiac is a pretty big deal, especially as you say, fallen Saturn sort of weakly defending the concept of boundaries. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
Neptune is sweeping in and washing in to dissolve them. I think this
Mm-hmm.
is a huge opportunity for people to look at the Aries part of their chart, whatever's going on there, and say, hey, I can actually create something new here. I can wash away some
Yeah.
sludgy stuff that's been holding me up, or maybe some like toxic walls that I've built that have made me feel like I'm not like other people or that I can't approach other people, but I want to. I want to participate in those social contracts or whatever it may be. I think there's a really powerful opportunity for something radically new in the Aries part of everybody's chart with this. And it's like Saturn's kind of priming the pump when it comes in. Of course, they retrograde back together into Pisces, Saturn, and Neptune, and then they come back in February. And we have an eclipse in Aquarius. Like there's all kinds of stuff going on in spring of
Mm-hmm.
next year that I think
Mm-hmm.
really speaks to this opportunity that people have to like make something new of this if they want to.
Absolutely. And just going on with like the Neptune and Aries like larger transit, it is a zeitgeist shift because it is one of those outer planets that, and when people talk about Neptune, it is kind of, it tends to be like very airy fairy, but like it is, that is actually a facet of the universe where like if Neptune is like the collective dream, and
Hmm.
from that emerges like this great sea of possibility. I think I did some writing earlier. When this Neptune transit, just thinking about what this Neptune transit means and thinking about the art movements that have shifted and like looking at shifts in art and art culture and media, because there's so much tied in with media and how that shapes a society, right? For
And
instance,
Neptune
I
is
think in
so
the,
associated with like imagery and art and books and film and
yeah.
everything. I mean, like that's such a Neptunian vector, that whole area.
Yeah. And with I think even in the inception chart for YouTube, the ruler of the ascent is conjunct Neptune, right? And and so like this idea of like Neptune symbolizing media and imagery and how and like going back to this earlier conversation we had in on this podcast of yeah, the symbolic. It is the symbolic. And I think when to really analyze what this Neptune transit will be like, especially with Saturn's presence there. It's like, what is the collective dream that we're all dreaming? What did we learn when Neptune was in Pisces, which did, I think, a massive opening up. You saw like online, like this, the fact that we had all the social media, all the emergence of YouTube and like people on TikTok and et cetera, et cetera. And we're just exposed to so many different ideas, the revival of like even the spiritual pagan community. The fact that in the 21st century we have people openly online like us having
Being
conversations about
heathens. Yeah.
spiritual talk, like being yeah, exactly, talking about spiritual topics, like the idea of like the Instagram tarot practitioner. That is so like, the Neptune, the opening up of a thought and idea. And I think now when I think of Aries, it's the applied side. It's like, well, what can you do now that you've learned all that and now you're open to these ideas and these rich traditions of knowledge? How do you actually do something with it? How does now your philosophy not become something that you simply just know and absorb, and now something that you can actually enact in your day-to-day life? And I think that
Mm.
there is that shift, especially with now, with we're at like basically the opening sextile from like the Saturn's conjunction with Pluto, right? With like Saturn in early
Yeah.
Aries, with that early Pluto in Aqua. I think it is contending with, this mass sentiment. There is fleet of like anti-technology these days. Like people, I feel like the children yearn to touch grass. I think a lot of us are kind of like, I think a lot of us are starting to get sick, sick of like
Yeah.
being so burdened by technology, and we're seeing how like, oh, there's a cost to this actually, that this almost borderless. Like in no other era have we been so lack of boundaries, kind of ever connected to the greater pool of the World Wide Web and therefore all the people on the World Wide Web.
And
And I think
ourselves, like our own
now
images as well, like our seeing our own face
oh
this many times in a day as we do.
yeah,
Like you used to have to go
yeah.
seek out a good puddle to see
Oh,
your face, you know?
oh, absolutely, absolutely. So that's so true because I think, and this is something, an idea I've been playing with, that the fact that the inception chart of YouTube, this big video platform, it's like literally the second most used like search engine in the world.
Yeah.
How has that changed the collective brain chemistry? The fact that like, and we know about this concept as like a lot of like therapists and psychologists have talked about this idea of like just like the projection of the image, like the parasocial relationships we form online when you don't actually know the person, but through like their online presence and through the version of ourselves that we put online, this um idea of like, do you actually know this person? And I think a lot about the sign of Aries is about authenticity. I think it's going to be as I guess of
Mm-hmm.
us trying to figure out what authenticity looks like in this era, when especially these days when the waterways, the airways are kind of clogged up with like AI bullshit, and people and your grandmother's not being able to distinguish what is a real photo or versus like an AI generated photo of you, I think, yeah, I think we're going to really have to question our own relationship with what authenticity looks like. And yeah,
Mm.
that's something I'm curious to like look out for, and how people start to do that. And it could even look like, you know, a back to analog type of thing where people start doing crafts again. That's something I'm really thinking about. Where I'm like, do people just start like taking up trades again? Because like I think, at least for
I
me,
think they
my
do. With
personal
this
life,
job market, they do.
I think that's kind of what I've seen happening for me. Like real thoughts I'm like thinking through my head, with how even unstable certain sectors that were purported to be so stable. Like back, like, a decade from before, people were saying tech is like going to be one of the most stable jobs in the future, yada, yada, yada. And like these days, especially with the onset of AI, not saying that it's going anywhere per se, or just, but
It
yeah,
is
there is
changing
way more
significantly.
instability. It's changing
Hmm.
significantly. Exactly. So I really think about like, what are these core essential skills? It's like the start of this, the natural zodiac, right? I really see it that way, where it's at the start of the equal, the sign on the equinoctial axis of Aries Libra. How, how do we the vital? What can I do now? That is like it's like primal stuff, right? How do you chop wood again? How do you sew again? Even if it's not perfect,
Yeah.
you're not relying on like a company to do it for you on like in a massive scale type of way, and you're not being sold that item by a business. Then if that's not happening, then what am I doing? I was like, oh, I'm doing it myself. I'm gonna just do it. I'm just gonna pick up the needle. I'm gonna, pick up the paintbrush. And I'm just gonna do it. And I feel like
Mm.
a lot of these Aries transits are really preparing for us for that type of mindset shift.
Oh, that's so brilliant. I love that so much. I think that that's such a great thing that people can think about natally for themselves is like grasping onto that there's an economy of initiation implied by Saturn and Aries, and
Totally.
but that doesn't mean it's not available to you. And in some ways what you summon up the energy to initiate is even more going to be even more hardcore than what you would have
Hmm.
otherwise. So but you can't do everything and you can't do nothing. You have to pick the things and you
Hmm.
have to go for them. But I love this idea of like just pick up the needle, just pick up the paintbrush. I think that's like a really good place to kind of put a pin in our convo. Now I know for a fact that we could talk for another 10 hours. Maybe we'll have to get a coffee at Norwalk and do just that because I have so much more
Absolutely,
to say.
absolutely.
But yeah, why don't you tell everybody where they can find your work and find your offerings and book a reading with you?
Yeah. So you can find me on my website at hughtrandastro.com, and I'm on social media on YouTube, Blue Sky, Threads, and Instagram at Hugh Tran Astro as well.
Incredibly consistent branding. I
Yes,
love
yes.
it.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, cool. Thank you so much, Hugh, for joining me. This has been so awesome. I really appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alexandra.
All right, that is all for this week's story. If you liked my interview with Hugh, make sure to go to Hugh's Instagram page and show him some love. Book a session with Hugh on his website, hughtranaastro.com. And if something is rising up for you this week, whether it's clarity or grief or desire or something unexpected or something that's like an intellectual live wire, or maybe you're really feeling the weight of that Saturn ingress, there is so much going on this week. You do not have to rush to try to understand what's happening. We have a really cool new moon in Gemini next week. That might be a better time to seek clarity. That might be a better time to seek agency. This week, just try to understand what it is that you're feeling. Make sure you're journaling and writing it down. Now, you can book a reading with me at ninelivesastrology.com. Keep an eye out. I have some new stuff landing soon. I'm running a contest pretty soon. So if you're walking through a big story this week, share it in the comments. I'd love to hear how this week is moving through you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you all next Monday.